Welcome to Detective Duo, where classic mysteries come alive, from quiet villages to secret meetings with Tommy and Tuppence themselves. Do remember to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. The clatter of teacups ricocheted through the breakfast room of Hilton House, that modest but fiercely dignified London boarding house where the chairs creaked like old bones and the curtains were held up more by optimism than thread. It was precisely the sort of place where every boarder believed themselves normal and every other boarder decidedly peculiar. For the moment, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford were simply another married couple seeking a pleasant, economical establishment with character, though undercover work ensured they stayed alert even while buttering toast. Mrs. Sayers, who spoke with the tragic solemnity of someone permanently betrayed by rising prices, sighed into her porridge. Butter is outrageous these days. Absolutely outrageous. One would think the cows were charging rent. Across from her, the nervous typist, pale, thin, and always tugging at her cardigan sleeves, dropped her spoon again. The clink rang out like a telegram announcing bad news. She apologized to no one in particular, cheeks pinking. At the head of the table, the retired colonel pounded the marmalade jar with the side of his fist. "Disgraceful stuff," he barked. "If this is the best the grocer can offer, civilization is finished." Tuppence hid a smile. "I do enjoy mornings here," she murmured to Tommy, who was watching the room with the lazy, pleasant expression he used whenever he was thinking intensely. "We've been in worse places," he whispered back. "Remember that guest house in Bournemouth? I'm fairly sure the mattress had ideas of its own." Before Tuppence could reply, the front door burst open, though not with force, more as if the handle had slipped from uncertain fingers. A man stepped inside, stopping halfway into the breakfast room as though crossing an invisible boundary. He was drenched, not the picturesque dampness of a man caught in a sudden shower, but the heavy-soaked look of someone who had walked through rain because he had no alternative. His coat clung to him, dripping steadily onto the worn carpet. Conversation dimmed. Chairs stopped squeaking. Even the colonel's disapproval froze mid-grumble. The man's skin was pale, his hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, wide, grey and restless, skimmed the room, landing on exits, corners, shadows. He stood too still, as if movement might crack him. "Terribly sorry," he said abruptly. "I'm looking for accommodation." He cleared his throat. "A room, if there's one." Mrs. Melling, the landlady, fluttered forward with the energy of a tired sparrow, trying to appear helpful. "Yes, of course, sir. We have an attic room available. May I have your name?" The man paused. It was only a heartbeat, but a heartbeat weighted with decision. "Gray," he said at last. "Mr. Gray." It was not a convincing lie. Tuppence felt the room shift. This man had brought something into Hilton House, something taut and fragile, like a violin string stretched too tight. The typist stared openly. Mrs. Sayers pressed her lips together. The colonel's moustache bristled in suspicion. "Please, sit for breakfast," Mrs. Melling coaxed. "You must be chilled through." Mr. Gray obeyed, taking the empty seat beside Tommy. He moved cautiously, as if expecting to be struck by invisible threats. When he reached for the teapot, his hand trembled slightly. "Awful weather," Tommy said pleasantly. "We seem to be having an unbroken streak of it." Gray swallowed. "Yes." "You're new to London?" Tommy continued. "Visiting," Gray said too quickly. "Only visiting." Tuppence, listening with outward nonchalance, noted the flicker of panic each time a question formed. He was trying to lie, but lacked the skill. His shoulders held the stiffness of a man expecting pursuit. Tommy reached for the sugar bowl. "And how did you hear of Hilton House?" "Pure chance." Gray hesitated again. "A recommendation." "From whom?" "A friend." Tuppence caught Tommy's eye. The lie didn't simply falter. It practically collapsed on the table, begging for assistance. Gray lifted a teacup, an old floral thing with a hairline crack, and his fingers clenched too tightly. The cup slipped. It smashed against the floor, splintering into jagged fragments. Gray jolted as though the noise had been a gunshot. "Oh dear," Mrs. Melling cried. "I'm terribly sorry," Gray murmured, breathing raggedly. "Terribly, terribly sorry." His apology sounded like a plea. Not the embarrassment of clumsiness, but fear that the broken cup might cost far more than porcelain. The colonel harumphed. "Young man, if your hands are that unsteady, you ought to see a doctor." Gray blanched. "No doctors," he said quickly, almost desperately. Tuppence's thoughts sharpened. A man terrified of doctors, a false name, a broken teacup treated like betrayal. Yes, something was wrong. When breakfast concluded, the boarders dispersed in their usual rhythms. Mrs. Sayers muttering about laundry, the typist hurrying off to catch her tram, the colonel retreating to the drawing-room newspapers as though waging a personal war with the editorial pages. Tommy and Tuppence followed at a polite distance as Mrs. Melling guided Grey upstairs. He moved like a man carrying invisible weight. Tuppence whispered, "What do you think?" "He doesn't belong here," Tommy murmured. "Not in that coat, not with that story, and not with those nerves." Tuppence nodded. "And he lied about the recommendation." "Quite badly," Tommy agreed. Later, when the household quieted again, Tuppence went to hang her coat by the stairs. Grey passed by her, heading for the small landing window. He stood with his back to her for a moment, gazing out as though the street below carried some omen only he could see. As he turned, she noticed it, a dark, reddish-brown smudge peeking from the edge of his cuff. He tugged his sleeve down at once, hiding it. A stain. Dried. Suspicious. Not the bright, cheerful red of jam or the rusty brown of old tea. Something far more troubling. "Mr. Grey," Tuppence said lightly, "are you quite all right?" He froze. "Yes," he managed. "Thank you." "You seem rather jumpy." Grey's breath caught. "It's just nothing." People who said just nothing almost always meant very much something. He brushed past her, retreating toward the staircase with the stiff urgency of a man seeking solitude. As he rounded the corner, Tuppence felt the faintest tremor in the air, the sense of a closed door behind which something unpleasant waited. Tommy appeared beside her. "Saw the stain," he murmured. "Noticed how he hid it," she replied. "Blood?" "Possibly." "Old?" "Possibly." Tommy folded his arms. "Well, my dear, we came to investigate petty thefts. Instead, we seem to have acquired a frightened man with questionable laundry." Tuppence's eyes glinted. "And you know how I feel about frightened men with questionable laundry." Positively thrilled. Utterly. As they walked back to their room, she felt the change in Hilton House, not visible, but palpable. Before Mr. Grey's arrival, the house had been a little shabby, a little noisy, occasionally nosy, but harmless. Now it felt as though someone had opened a window on a winter night and forgotten to shut it. A current of unease slipped through every corridor. That afternoon, the atmosphere never quite returned to its usual domestic hum. People glanced over shoulders. Mrs. Sayers fussed more than usual. The typist locked her bedroom door twice. The colonel glared suspiciously at anyone within arm's reach. Tommy caught Tuppence's eye. "This will be more interesting than petty theft." "Oh, infinitely. And something tells me Mr. Grey isn't running from stolen teaspoons." "No," Tommy agreed softly. "He's running from something that frightens him far more." Tuppence touched the banister thoughtfully. The polished wood was smooth beneath her fingers, but the air felt unsettled, like fabric pulled too tight. Something had entered Hilton House that morning, and it wasn't merely a stranger. The morning began not with the cheerful clink of teacups, but with a rustle of newspapers held too high and voices kept too low. Hilton House, ordinarily a jumble of domestic noises, had developed a hush like a church before a funeral. Even the dining-room clock, usually too fast by 10 minutes, seemed reluctant to tick. Tuppence noticed it first when she entered, Mrs. Sayers peering over a newspaper as though spying through fortified battlements, the nervous typist darting glances toward the staircase, the colonel sitting ramrod straight, teacup untouched, moustache bristling in battle formation, and all of them stealing looks at one person. Mr. Grey sat alone, hands clasped, shoulders contracted. Each time the floor creaked, he flinched. Tommy leaned toward Tuppence, keeping his voice low. If the goal was to blend in, he has missed by a wide margin. "Poor man," Tuppence murmured. "He's like a violin that's been tightened one peg too far." She reached for the teapot, but her eyes never left Grey. He looked hollowed out, like someone who had slept with one eye open. The colonel muttered, loud enough for the table, "Mark my words, that fellow is trouble." He said it with the relish of a man delighted to have found fresh ammunition for complaint. Grey stiffened. Mrs. Sayers sniffed dramatically. "I don't like it. Ever since he arrived, everything's felt unsettled." "Everything feels unsettled because you drink tea the way other people drink catastrophe," Tuppence said sweetly. Mrs. Sayers glared at her, but had no rebuttal. Tommy's fork paused halfway to his mouth when he noticed Gray avoiding the drawing room entirely. Not once did the man step near its doorway. When other boarders shifted chairs, Gray jerked away. If someone walked behind him, his whole body tensed. Fear wasn't simply clinging to him. It had taken residence. Breakfast hadn't even finished when the next ripple of trouble arrived. "My brooch!" Mrs. Sayers cried suddenly, hands flying to her collar. "It's missing. Again." The typist flinched so sharply she nearly toppled her teacup. The maid, summoned by the commotion, looked offended. "I didn't touch it, madam." Mrs. Sayers drew herself up. "Things disappear in this house. Things of value." "Things of value?" Tommy repeated mildly. "I thought it was brass." "It's sentimentally valuable," she snapped. Tuppence watched Mr. Gray's expression. He didn't look guilty. He looked wounded. "Of course it would go missing today," Mrs. Sayers continued dramatically. "Ever since this new gentleman arrived." Gray stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "I haven't stolen anything." "Who said you had?" she demanded. "You said it with your eyes." The typist whispered, "Maybe he is a thief," but her voice trembled. Tommy intervened smoothly. "If a brooch has vanished, I'm sure it will turn up. Objects tend to wander on their own in houses like this." Mrs. Sayers ignored him. Gray left the room hurriedly, nearly colliding with the sideboard. Tuppence caught the pain in his face as he fled. Not guilt, pain. Tuppence filed the expression away. Valuable. The house quieted again, but only on the surface, like a pond with something unsettling beneath. As Tommy and Tuppence made their way upstairs, they heard the unmistakable hiss of whispered gossip coming from the landing. "He's hiding something," murmured a voice Tuppence recognized as belonging to the piano teacher. "Being hunted," said another. "I know that look. Saw it on a fella during the Blitz." "Or maybe he's the thief," added a third voice, the typist, and her whisper carried a quiver of self-righteousness. Tuppence cleared her throat deliberately. Silence crashed down like a curtain. "Good morning," she said generously. "Lovely day for conspiracy theories." The piano teacher blushed. The typist scurried into her room. Tommy chuckled mildly as they continued down the corridor. "You handle gossip like a surgeon wields a scalpel," he said. "It's the only way," Tuppence replied. "If you let it fester, it becomes gangrene." The day drifted into evening. Gray emerged only briefly, drifting through the hallway like a quiet shadow. Every time the front door opened, he flinched. Every time steps sounded behind him, he stiffened. At dinner, he barely touched his food. His eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. Tommy observed him with the calm interest of a natural detective. "He's checking that inner pocket of his coat every 5 minutes." "What do you suppose is in it?" Tuppence asked. "Something he thinks someone might take," Tommy murmured. "Or something someone might kill for." The remark lingered. After dinner, the boarders retired early, the murmurs of the house flattening into an uneasy quiet. The typist locked her door with 2 decisive clicks. The colonel insisted on testing all the window latches. Mrs. Sayers reminded everyone, twice, that valuable items were best kept on one's person. Tommy and Tuppence waited until the house felt still. Then footsteps creaked softly in the hallway. Tuppence nudged Tommy. "He's moving." Gray was slipping out the back door. "Let's see," she whispered. Tommy nodded. "But careful. A man running from something can be unpredictable." They followed Gray into the narrow back garden, the gate clicking faintly as he hurried into the alley beyond. Tuppence kept a careful distance, letting Tommy blend into the shadows behind her. Gray walked quickly, shoulders hunched, head ducked. Every 30 seconds he pressed a hand to his inner pocket. "Like a man checking a heartbeat," Tuppence murmured. "You're poetic today," Tommy whispered. "I'm observant." Gray reached the end of the alley and stepped into a small side street where the lamps flickered with inconsistent resolve. Instead of meeting someone or exchanging signals, as Tommy half expected, Gray stopped under a street lamp and looked downward, not searching, grieving. His posture slumped. His hand pressed the inner pocket again, but this time gently, almost tenderly. His eyes looked haunted. Tuppence's breath softened. "He's not meeting anyone," she murmured. "No," Tommy agreed. "He's remembering something." They approached slowly, making a show of strolling rather than stalking. Gray startled the moment he noticed them, stepping back like a trapped animal. "Mr. Gray," Tommy said gently. "Evening walk?" Gray swallowed. I needed air." "Understandable," Tuppence said. "You looked distressed earlier. He shook his head violently. "Please, don't ask questions. Don't involve the police." Tommy exchanged a meaningful glance with Tuppence. "Why would we?" he asked quietly. Gray's breathing quickened. "Because something will happen. Something will happen if the wrong people know where I am." Tuppence stepped closer. "Who are the wrong people?" "I can't say." "You can," she insisted softly. "People don't run this hard unless they're being chased." Gray blinked hard, tears trembling dangerously. "Please, leave me alone, for your own good." "But we're not in danger," Tommy said lightly. "At least, not unless you tell us who might wish us harm." Before Gray could answer, Tommy's tone shifted subtly. "Is that someone watching us?" All three stiffened. At the farthest corner of the street, a silhouette stood motionless. Not leaning, not observing casually, standing with method, posture precise, attention honed. A watcher, not a passer-by. "Who is that?" Tuppence whispered. Gray's voice cracked. "They've found me." He bolted. "Gray!" Tommy called. But the man was already sprinting down the street with a desperate, uneven gait. Tommy and Tuppence raced after him, but he turned a corner, then another. His footsteps echoed and vanished. When they reached the next street, it was empty. No Gray, no watcher, nothing but London's indifferent street lamps flickering their uncertainty. Tommy exhaled slowly. "Well, that confirms it." "Confirms what?" Tuppence asked, breathless. "That someone else is watching Hilton House." She folded her arms tightly. "And whatever frightened Mr. Gray didn't stay at the door. It followed him." Tommy nodded grimly. "Which means it may have followed us." Tuppence turned back toward the boarding house, her expression sharpening. Hilton House was no longer merely a temporary disguise. It was now the center of a hunt. Something had begun. Something dangerous. And it was gathering momentum in the shadows. The scream jolted the entire boarding house awake. It wasn't a melodramatic shriek, but a sharp, startled cry, the kind that suggested someone had walked into a nightmare by accident. Tommy was halfway out of bed before the echoes died. Tuppence snatched her dressing gown and hurried after him, her bare feet whispering across the hallway carpet. They found the maid standing rigid in the kitchen doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other pointing. The kitchen looked as though a small hurricane had swept through in the dead of night. Drawers yanked open, crockery shifted, a bag of flour tipped sideways, dusting the table like fresh snowfall. The pantry shelves had been ransacked, tins on their sides, jars at perilous angles, spices scattered like confetti after an unhappy wedding. And in the middle of the floor, stark and accusing under the gaslight, lay a red-handled knife, its small blade streaked with something dark. For a heartbeat, neither Tommy nor Tuppence spoke. Then the maid whispered, voice quivering, "I found it just like this, first thing this morning. I swear on my mother's own Bible I didn't touch a thing." Mrs. Melling, the landlady, arrived next, breathless, her hair pinned askew. "Burglars," she declared, wringing her hands. "We must have had burglars." The cook puffed indignantly. "Burglars wouldn't leave my kitchen in a mess, and I locked up last night. Every drawer, every pantry shelf, every window." Tuppence stepped into the chaos, eyes sweeping across the carnage with the keen efficiency of a woman accustomed to suspicious scenes. "Burglars," she repeated mildly, "usually prefer valuables to tins of soup." Mrs. Melling blinked. "What are you implying?" "That this wasn't a burglary," Tuppence said, kneeling to inspect the knife. "This was staging, a performance, and whoever performed it wanted us to think something dramatic occurred." Tommy crouched beside her. "I agree. Look, drawers pulled open but nothing taken. Pantry scattered but selectively. Someone wanted it to look convincing enough to fool a sleepy house, but not anyone with sense." He touched his finger to the dark smear on the blade. "Dried." "Not rust," Tuppence murmured. "Not sauce either." "No," Tommy agreed. "It's blood. Question is, human or animal?" Mrs. Melling paled. "Blood? In my kitchen?" Tuppence rose, dusting flour from her hands. "Whose footprints are these?" A trail of muddy impressions crossed the floor tiles. The size and shape didn't match the maid's boots or the cook's sensible shoes. "They're not mine," the maid said immediately. "I take these off before I start my work." "And they're not mine," the cook huffed. "I haven't been in the garden this week. Too cold." Tuppence studied the prints. "These are much heavier than either of yours. Wider. Someone trying not to be recognized left these behind. Mrs. Melling gasped. Our burglar? But Tommy shook his head. Our vandal. Tuppence moved to one of the cupboards, the only one whose contents looked disturbed with intentional precision. She touched the back panel. Someone was searching for something in here. Not money, not jewellery. A slim object. A notebook, perhaps. Or a packet, Tommy added. Something flat. Mrs. Melling looked from one to the other in growing horror. But who in this house would do such a thing? Before anyone could answer, a new voice spoke from the doorway. I didn't, Mr. Grey whispered. Everyone turned. He looked ghost-like, pale, trembling, eyes bruised with exhaustion. His coat was buttoned lopsidedly as though he'd dressed without noticing, his gaze locked on the knife with something close to despair. Mrs. Melling clutched her shawl. You came in late last night. I heard you. Grey shook his head violently. I swear, I didn't do this. Then why is there blood on your sleeve? The Colonel barked, entering behind him. Grey's face drained to chalk. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a loaded glance. The time had come. Tuppence stepped forward gently. Mr. Grey, yesterday, on your cuff, there was a stain, dried, reddish-brown. She held his gaze. Is that the same as this? Grey swallowed hard. It's blood. I won't lie, but it's not mine. Mrs. Melling staggered back. Whose is it then? Grey closed his eyes. I can't explain. Tommy spoke quietly. Then you must understand how it looks. I know, Grey whispered. I know how it looks. His voice cracked. But I didn't do this. The typist appeared, hugging her cardigan around her shoulders as though shielding herself from the truth. I heard footsteps last night, she announced shakily. Late, very late. Someone moving down the corridor. Mrs. Sayers materialized behind her, hair in curlers. I told you, a thief in the house. Not thief, the Colonel thundered. Criminal. Grey flinched at the word. Tuppence, watching closely, noticed something else. Guilt, yes, but not the guilt of wrongdoing. The guilt of association, or of knowledge. Tommy, she said calmly, let's check the windows. If someone came in from outside, there'll be signs. He nodded, rising. And the back garden path. Muddy footprints indoors usually begin somewhere. As they left the room, Mrs. Melling continued to sputter about burglars and reputations and whether guests would cancel their rooms. Grey leaned against the wall, breathing shallowly, as though the house itself were pressing in on him. Outside, the back path glistened with early dew. Tommy crouched near the vegetable patch, scanning the soil. There, he murmured. Something half-buried poked through the earth, a scrap of paper, water-warped at its edges. Tuppence knelt beside him as he pulled it free. It was a torn page from a ledger, ink smudged, lines ruled, and a short list of names. 2 were violently crossed out. One address in Birmingham was written underneath in sharp handwriting. Tuppence frowned. Someone's been keeping track of people, or debts, or contacts. And 2 of them are very emphatically finished, Tommy said, studying the force of the pen marks. They walked the perimeter. Every window latch remained undisturbed. No forced entry, no disturbed hedges, no sign of anyone having climbed in. Back inside, the boarding house had erupted into a miniature war zone. The typist was clinging to a teacup. I heard footsteps, she repeated for the 3rd time. Under my door, slow footsteps. I was too frightened to look. Mrs. Sayers now wore enough indignation to fuel a march. I'm locking my room. No one is getting inside. No one. The Colonel stood like a general surveying enemy territory. I warned you, he proclaimed. This house is riddled with criminal element. You let one suspicious man in, and the whole establishment collapses. Grey, seated at the edge of a chair, pressed his hands to his temples in misery. Tuppence approached him with measured steps. Mr. Grey, what happened to you last night? He shook his head. Nothing. Where did you go? Just out. To meet someone? Tommy asked. Grey's eyes widened. No, I swear. Tuppence waited a moment, then asked softly, Is the blood connected to what you were running from yesterday? Grey's breath shuddered. Please, don't make me say more. If I tell you, it won't keep you safe. The Colonel snorted. Safe from what? Ridiculous. But Grey wasn't looking at the Colonel. He was looking at Tommy and Tuppence with the expression of a man guarding a secret so heavy it bruised him. "I didn't do this," he whispered again, "but someone wants you to think I did." Tuppence straightened. "We believe you, but belief doesn't solve the mess in that kitchen." Tommy nodded. "We need facts." "And we need to find who created that scene," Tuppence finished, "because it wasn't meant to frighten Mrs. Melling." Her gaze drifted to the disturbed cupboard. "It was meant to frighten you," she said quietly. Gray's shoulders sagged. Behind them, Mrs. Sayers slammed her door. The typist retreated to her room. The Colonel muttered about calling Scotland Yard. The cook banged pots as though punishing the furniture for its involvement. Hilton House wasn't simply unsettled now. It was simmering. The polite domestic veneer had cracked, revealing tension gathered like steam under a sealed lid. And at the centre of that pressure cooker sat a trembling young man with a haunted past, and someone out there determined to make him look very, very guilty. The morning after the kitchen chaos unfolded with a brittle quietness, the sort that carried the echo of suppressed accusations. It was not silence, but a muffled pressure, conversations clipped, glances lowered, doors shutting more quickly than they normally would. Hilton House had developed a second skin overnight, thin, translucent, and painfully fragile. Tommy and Tuppence knew better than to prod directly. A boarding house was like a beehive, disturb the wrong corner, and the whole colony stung. So they moved gently, subtly, and with the light tact of seasoned observers. Tuppence took the lead, adopting her most amiable, just another friendly boarder persona. She made a round of harmless morning visits. A tap on the typist's door led to an apology for frightening noises last night, which the girl accepted with a shaky smile. "Mr. Gray looked dreadful at breakfast," Tuppence added casually. "Have you noticed anything odd about him?" The typist hesitated, fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan. I've been receiving notes," she confessed in a small voice. "Papers slipped under my door. No signature, just warnings." "Warnings?" Tuppence kept her tone light, though her pulse sharpened. The typist nodded. "The last one said, 'Don't trust new arrivals.' I thought it meant him." Tuppence offered a sympathetic noise, her mind already spinning. Anonymous notes were rarely innocent. Next she spoke to the Colonel, who sat in the drawing-room with his boots polished and a glare sharp enough to slice paper. He was examining the morning newspaper as if interrogating it for treason. "You knew a smuggler once?" Tuppence asked conversationally, pretending to admire one of his dusty medals displayed on the mantel. The Colonel snorted. "Blasted man was in my regiment. Dishonourable fellow. Ran contraband on the side. Clever enough to get away with it for years. Always said he'd retire rich. Probably lying in a ditch now." "Friends of his still around?" The Colonel's moustache stiffened. "I don't keep track of criminals, madam." But the flare of defensiveness told her plenty. Soldiers carried grudges like medals, proudly and publicly. Her final stop was Mrs. Sayers' room. The woman opened the door instantly as if she'd been waiting to complain to someone. "Terrible state of things," she said, ushering Tuppence inside. "Something's wrong in this house. Awfully wrong." "You always seem to know what's happening," Tuppence smiled sweetly. "It must be terribly exhausting." Mrs. Sayers preened, delighted to be recognised as the unofficial authority. "Oh, I notice everything. For instance, did you know the piano teacher sleeps with her door unlocked? Foolish, if you ask me. And that the Colonel keeps a velvet pouch in his bedside drawer. Saw it once when he left the door ajar." Tuppence blinked. "How on earth did you—" "Oh, one sees things," Mrs. Sayers said airily. "People forget the landing creaks." Which was both a confession and a warning. By late afternoon, Tuppence had gathered enough fragments to knit together a muddy picture. Secrets layered on secrets, gossips watching gossips, and a history in the Colonel's regiment that might not be as dusty as the medals on his mantle. But she hadn't expected what came next. Evening settled over Hilton House with the dim glow of gas lamps. Shadows lengthened, footsteps softened. Somewhere down the hall the piano teacher attempted a hesitant version of "By the Light of the Silvery Moon," but even her usually gentle playing sounded strained. Tommy entered their room carrying a cup of tea for Tuppence. "Anything interesting?" "Everything interesting," she replied, dropping onto the bed. Anonymous notes, military smuggling, a woman who knows far too much about other people's belongings, and Gray wandering around like a ghost. "Gray is the linchpin," Tommy murmured. Someone tied this mess to him deliberately. Tuppence rose to stretch and pulled open the curtains. Then she froze. A figure stood outside the garden wall, half hidden by the dimming light, not strolling, not loitering, staring, directly at the house. Tuppence's breath caught. "Tommy." He crossed the room instantly. "Where?" She pointed. The man did not move. His face was obscured by shadow, but his stillness was unnatural, too intentional, too focused. One hand rested against the wall as though anchoring him. "I don't like that," Tommy said softly. Tuppence's hand tightened on the curtain fabric. "Should we?" Before she finished, the figure jerked back as if startled. Then he turned and fled down the alley beside the garden. Tommy was already moving. "Stay close," he instructed, and they hurried downstairs, slipping through the hallway and out the back door into the narrow garden path. The gate clicked behind them. They entered the alleyway just in time to glimpse the man's silhouette rounding a corner. Tommy gave chase, long strides bouncing off brick walls. Tuppence followed, faster than she looked. They reached the main road. Too many doors, too many turns, too many places to vanish. The street was empty. No watcher, no echo of hurried steps, no indication he'd been there at all. Tommy exhaled sharply. He knew the area. He wasn't guessing which way to run. "And he wasn't watching us," Tuppence whispered. "He was watching Hilton House." Her stomach tightened. They returned home slowly, unsettled by the encounter. The atmosphere inside the hallway felt altered, heavier, as if the house itself absorbed the tension from outside. That was when they saw him. Mr. Gray stood halfway down the hall, suitcase in hand, trembling violently. The case rattled against the floorboards from the shaking of his grip. "They found me," he whispered. "Who?" Tommy asked. Gray's face twisted. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try us," Tuppence said softly. "No," his voice cracked. "No one can help me. I have to go." He turned toward the door, but before he reached it, a figure stepped out of the shadows. The piano teacher. Normally timid, her hands now clenched the handle of her music case with uncharacteristic determination. "I saw him," she said sharply, pointing. "Last night. In the kitchen." The hall erupted with voices. The typist gasping, the colonel muttering satisfaction, Mrs. Sayers peeking from her door like a self-appointed judge. Gray looked astonished. "That's not true." The piano teacher trembled but held her ground. "I saw someone by the pantry. I assumed it was you." "You assumed wrong," Gray said desperately. Her eyes darted away, unsure, but the accusation hung heavy. Tuppence stepped between them. "Let him speak." Gray looked around wildly. "I didn't break into the kitchen. I didn't touch anything. I was outside, alone, thinking." "Thinking about what?" the colonel demanded. Gray shook his head. "You wouldn't understand." Tommy approached him slowly. "You're frightened. We see that. But running helps no one." Gray sank into a chair, hands covering his face. For a moment, Tuppence thought he might finally reveal the truth. His lips parted. A crash shattered the silence. It came from upstairs, a sharp impact, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being thrown aside. The colonel straightened instantly. "My room." Everyone surged toward the staircase. Tommy reached the landing first, followed by Tuppence and the rest of the boarders. The colonel burst through his door with surprising speed for a man of his age. His room was ransacked, drawers open, sheets flung off the bed, a lamp knocked to the floor, and the colonel himself went rigid. "It's gone," he whispered. "What's gone?" Tuppence asked. He didn't speak for a long moment. His face hardened, the way a man's face does when he stands on the edge of an old battlefield. "My velvet pouch." "What was in it?" Tommy pressed. The colonel shut the drawer sharply. "Nothing for you to concern yourselves with." Tommy met Tuppence's eyes. Something had just escalated, dramatically. The kitchen chaos had been a warning shot. This was precision. Someone had searched the colonel's room with intent. Someone wanted whatever was inside that velvet pouch. But only the colonel knew what it contained, and he wasn't about to say a word. The uproar began before breakfast and escalated with remarkable speed. Hilton House, already frayed by kitchen knives and midnight footsteps, now resembled a gathering of frightened hens, wings flapping, voices rising, and everyone desperately pretending they weren't the most shaken of the lot. At the center of the commotion stood the colonel, red-faced and rigid, gesticulating with the offended dignity of a man who had once commanded troops and now found himself battling bedroom burglars. His ransacked room had become the focus of the household's fascination, horror, and gossip, 3 staples that kept boarding houses running. "It's an outrage," he barked as Tommy and Tuppence entered. "A violation, an insult of the highest order." "Of what order exactly?" Tuppence asked with infuriating politeness. The Colonel puffed out his chest, then deflated slightly. "My private things have been disturbed. My personal belongings." Tommy tilted his head. "The velvet pouch, you mean?" The Colonel stiffened. "I never said anything about a pouch." "You didn't," Tuppence agreed. "Mrs. Sayers did, loudly." Through the doorway, Mrs. Sayers stood in the hall, hands clasped in the ecstasy of scandal, positively vibrating with the thrill of being quoted. Tommy turned back to the Colonel. "What was taken?" "A war medal," the Colonel snapped. "Nothing valuable in the market, of course. Purely sentimental." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. The Colonel's agitation wasn't the wistful longing of a man mourning a keepsake. It was sharper, tighter, and threaded with something like fear. "Why would someone take a medal?" Tuppence asked. "For mischief, disrespect, treasonous behaviour." "Or," Tommy said gently, "because something else was inside the pouch." The Colonel froze. The silence that followed was so abrupt that even the creaking floorboards seemed to stop listening. "That," the Colonel said slowly, "is none of your concern." "Everything happening in this house is our concern," Tuppence said, "including last night's kitchen fiasco." The Colonel glared at her, but his eyes darted away, the involuntary flicker of guilt or memory. Tuppence softened her voice. "Something was taken because it meant something, perhaps more than a medal usually would." The Colonel turned away, shoulders hunched. "The medal," he swallowed. "It belonged to a friend, a fallen friend." "Who?" Tommy asked. "No further questions," the Colonel barked, instantly defensive, "and I would thank you to stay out of my affairs." He stormed past them, nearly colliding with Mrs. Sayers, who squeaked like a deflating bellows. When he was gone, Tuppence murmured, "War medal, my foot. There's something more in that drawer than nostalgia." "And now someone else has it," Tommy said. The tension in Hilton House coiled tighter. Tuppence slipped into the Colonel's room after the hallway quieted. The door hung crooked on its hinges where the intruder had forced it. The lamp was still on its side, its shade lopsided. Drawers had been emptied with ruthless efficiency, clothes strewn, bedding tossed. It didn't look like the frenzied chaos of someone searching blindly. It looked like the methodical dismantling of a room by someone who knew exactly what they intended to find. She began to examine the scene quietly. Tommy kept watch at the door. "Look at this," Tuppence murmured. Behind the heavy dresser, half slipped between the wall and furniture, was a folded piece of paper. She tugged it free. A map, a street plan of Birmingham. 3 red circles marked different locations. One of those circles matched the address from Tommy's soil-stained ledger scrap. "Well, well," Tuppence whispered, "our Colonel has been keeping secrets. Birmingham ones." Tommy nodded. Someone wanted this badly enough to ransack a military man's room. That's no trivial burglary. They replaced the dresser and left the room just as footsteps sounded in the hall. The piano teacher appeared, holding her music case like a shield. She looked as though the slightest breeze might topple her. May I speak with you?" she whispered. Tuppence led her downstairs to the quiet sitting room. The woman perched on the edge of a chair, fingers twisting nervously. "I shouldn't have accused Mr. Gray," she said. I heard noises and assumed, but I didn't see him." Tommy nodded. "People act out of fear. You're not the only one." "But I did see shadows," she continued, "under the kitchen door, twice." "When?" Tuppence asked. "Once around midnight, and again just before dawn." "2 different shadows?" Tommy probed. She nodded. "The first was taller, broad, the second smaller, lighter steps." Tuppence thought of Gray, thin, slight, frightened, and the heavy, muddy footprints left on the kitchen tiles. 2 people, she said slowly. 2 visitors to the kitchen, 2 motives. The piano teacher nodded miserably. "I know everyone thinks I'm timid, but I swear I'm not lying." Tuppence placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "We believe you." But the revelation deepened the mystery. 2 intruders meant 2 agendas, or two phases of the same plan. And Gray wasn't the only frightened person in this house. When they confronted Gray with this new information, he seemed almost relieved. "Yes," he whispered. "I went downstairs near dawn. I was hungry, nothing more. I hadn't slept all night." "And the knife?" Tuppence asked gently. Gray's jaw tightened. "That knife was not meant for anyone here." "Meaning?" Tommy pressed. Gray shook his head. "I can't explain, not yet." "Was the blood connected to last night?" Tuppence asked. Gray's eyes closed briefly. "It wasn't mine. It wasn't—" His voice trembled. "Please don't ask me." "Gray," Tommy said, "whatever you're running from is now inside this house. You need allies." The young man looked at them with hollow, frightened eyes. "Allies die." His words sent a cold ripple through the room. Tuppence leaned forward. "What happened in Birmingham?" Gray flinched. "I've said too much already." He retreated to his room, trembling so hard that his steps were uneven. Meanwhile, tension among the boarders escalated with the natural speed of domestic panic. Mrs. Sayers accused the maid of complicity. The maid accused the typist of sneaking around at night. The typist accused the colonel of keeping stolen property. The colonel accused everyone. Hilton House, once merely nosy, was now a cauldron with its lid rattling violently. Tuppence observed the chaos with sharp attention. So many coincidences. The Birmingham address on the torn ledger page. The colonel's Birmingham map. Gray's panic surrounding the same region. An intruder watching Hilton House from the garden wall. The red-handled knife planted in the kitchen. Footsteps at 2 separate hours. A stolen medal that wasn't about sentiment at all. "It all points backwards," Tuppence murmured, "towards something that happened long before Hilton House, long before Gray arrived." Tommy nodded. "Something involving the colonel, and that medal." "And someone else," Tuppence added. "Someone still alive." Tommy studied the Birmingham map. Why would the colonel hide this? Unless he thought someone was looking for it. Or unless he didn't want someone to find him, Tuppence said. "Not all war stories end with medals. Some end with unfinished business." She paced the sitting room. "And Gray is tied to this. He knows something, or he's searching for someone." "Or someone is searching for him," Tommy said. "And they've found the house." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "This is no longer about petty theft or household mischief. Someone is trying to bury a past event. Something violent. Something secret." "And someone else is trying to uncover it," Tommy added. "They've all converged here," Tuppence said. "At Hilton House, in this cramped, overheated nest of fragile tempers and trembling secrets. And the most dangerous people," she murmured, "are not always the ones who look afraid." Tommy folded the Birmingham map carefully. "We need answers, and the colonel is the first door to knock on." "Then we'll knock," Tuppence said, rising with renewed resolve. For Hilton House was no longer merely a boarding house. It was a battlefield of old ghosts. And someone inside its walls was willing to break rooms, plant knives, stalk shadows, and steal wartime relics to keep those ghosts buried. The discovery happened with the quiet eeriness of something placed deliberately, almost ceremonially. It was mid-morning. The household had just begun gathering in the drawing room for what Mrs. Melling insisted on calling a recovery tea, though the tension in the air suggested that no one was likely to recover from anything anytime soon. The colonel stood stiffly near the window, glowering into the garden. Mrs. Sayers lurked by the mantelpiece, sniffing as though suspecting dust. The typist hovered anxiously by the bookshelf. Mr. Gray had not yet come down. No surprise there. But it was Tuppence who noticed it first. A velvet pouch, placed neatly, very neatly, on the mantel. Not dropped, not tossed, placed. For a moment she simply stared, as if the object had materialized from thin air. Then she stepped closer. "Tommy," she said softly, "look." He joined her and felt the jolt she had felt. "The colonel's pouch," he murmured. The colonel spun around. "What did you say?" Tuppence picked it up and held it out. "This, Colonel. It seems your missing item has reappeared." Mrs. Sayers gasped with almost operatic delight. "Oh, heavens, how mysterious!" The colonel strode forward, snatching the pouch from Tuppence's hand with the urgency of a man seizing a recovered limb. He opened it quickly, too quickly, as though afraid the contents might evaporate. Then he froze. "What's wrong?" Tommy asked quietly. Instead of answering, the colonel reached inside and retrieved a small metal disc, no larger than a shilling, round, cold, and etched with fine symbols that shimmered faintly in the gaslight. Tuppence leaned closer. "Those markings, they look like coordinates." The colonel swallowed hard. His stern face, usually carved from military resolve, had softened into something more fragile, dread. Tommy saw it immediately. "Colonel," he murmured, "this isn't a medal, is it?" "No," the colonel admitted, voice cracking. "It isn't." Mrs. Sayers clapped a hand over her mouth. "Then what—" "Be quiet," he snapped. But the sharpness faltered. The man was rattled. Tuppence lowered her voice. "Colonel, it's time to tell us." The room held its breath. Even the floorboards seemed to pause their habitual creaking. Finally, the colonel sank heavily into the nearest chair, the disc trembling slightly in his fingers. "I served," he said, "during the war with two men, Alec Harbury, a codebreaker, brilliant mind, and Finch, a courier whose real name none of us knew." "Secret communications?" Tommy asked. "Yes, we used devices like this." He lifted the disc. "A set of 4. We split them, one each, so if one of us was compromised, the others could still decode messages." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "So the pouch contained one of those discs?" The colonel nodded. "After the war ended, Harbury vanished, went off with a final encrypted message and was never heard from again." "And you kept the disc hidden because—" Tommy prompted. The colonel's jaw tightened. "Because some secrets do not die with peace." The sentence hung like frost. Before anyone could respond, the stairs creaked. Mr. Grey appeared in the doorway, pale, fragile, eyes wide with exhaustion. "Sir," he whispered, "did you say Harbury?" The colonel stiffened. "Yes." Grey's legs nearly buckled. Tommy moved forward in time to steady him. "Alec Harbury," Grey whispered, voice breaking. "He was my father." The room snapped into stunned silence. Mrs. Sayers gasped so loudly she swayed. The typist looked close to fainting. Even the colonel seemed briefly robbed of speech. Tuppence guided Grey gently into a chair. "Take your time," she said. Grey lifted shaking hands to his face. "I came here because I recognized your name," he said to the colonel. "I found it on a tenant list. I hoped you could tell me something. Anything." The colonel gripped the arm of his chair. "Why didn't you say so?" "Because people disappear when they speak of my father," Grey whispered. "I didn't know who to trust." Mrs. Sayers muttered, "Good heavens, we've been harbouring espionage in the laundry cupboard." Tuppence shot her a chastising look. "Colonel," Tommy said gently, "what happened to Harbury?" The colonel hesitated, deeply, painfully, before answering. He suspected betrayal. Grey's breath caught. "He told me," the colonel continued, "that someone on our team, either Finch or perhaps another, was selling information. We argued. He left to verify his suspicions and never returned." "And the message he took?" Tommy asked. "Unknown. I assumed it was incriminating." Grey's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "All my life I believed he abandoned us. My mother died thinking he'd chosen secrets over family." Tuppence's heart softened. "He may have been trying to save you." Grey bowed his head. For a moment, only the gentle hum of the gas lamp filled the silence. Then the telephone rang, a sharp, abrupt peal that stabbed through the heavy quiet. Mrs. Melling shrieked and knocked into an end table, sending a stack of coasters skittering across the floor. Tommy strode into the hall and answered the call. "Hilton House," he said calmly. Nothing. Then a distorted voice, blurred as though filtered through cloth. "Tell Mr. Grey to meet us tonight." Tommy's grip tightened. "Who is this?" "You have 3 hours," the voice hissed. "He comes alone, or more things will vanish besides medals." The line went dead. Tommy re-entered the drawing room. Grey's face was bloodless. "Is it them?" "Yes," Tommy said quietly, "and they want you alone." "No!" Tuppence burst. "Absolutely not. This is a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Tommy agreed. "The question is, what kind?" Grey's hands shook violently. "I can't go. They'll kill me." Tommy sat beside him. "No one is sending you anywhere alone. But the threat is meant to divide us," Tuppence finished. "They want you isolated. They want control." The colonel rose abruptly, pacing. This is my fault. My past has put us all at risk. Not just your past, Tommy said. Gray's father was part of something bigger. Someone out there still wants what Harbury knew, or hid. Gray gazed at the disc on the Colonel's palm. They want the set, or what it leads to, Tuppence murmured. And they'll stop at nothing to get it, the Colonel admitted. Nothing. Mrs. Sayers wrung her hands. This is all too much. I didn't sign up to be in a spy novel. We're all in one, Tuppence said dryly. Some of us with better roles than others. Gray stood abruptly, too abruptly, knocking the side table with his knee. I need to leave, he said. They followed me here. You're all in danger. You're not leaving, Tommy said firmly, unless we say so. Gray blinked. But you came for answers, Tuppence said. Now you have half of them. Stay for the rest. The Colonel reluctantly set the disc on the mantel again, staring at it as though it were the ghost of an old enemy. What happened after Harbury vanished? Tommy asked. The Colonel exhaled. Finch disappeared a week later. Some believed he fled. Others claimed he was killed. Someone, Tuppence said slowly, is still tying up loose ends. And Gray, Tommy added, is the last loose thread. Gray lowered his head. My father didn't die peacefully, did he? The Colonel's silence was answer enough. Tuppence stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Gray's shoulder. We'll find out what happened to him. We won't let his story end in shadows. For the first time since they had met him, Gray allowed himself to breathe. Tommy glanced toward the telephone, jaw set with resolve. They want a meeting tonight. Then we'll give them one. But they said, Gray began. Yes, Tommy interrupted. I know what they said. Tuppence's eyes glinted. They'll regret thinking we follow instructions. Gray stared between them, astonished. You're really going to help me? You're not alone anymore, Tuppence said. Tommy nodded. And whoever's been watching this house, watching you, is about to find out they chose the wrong boarding house. The velvet pouch lay on the mantel. The disc shimmered faintly under the lamplight. Gray's breathing steadied. The Colonel braced himself. And the trap, undeniably, unmistakably, had been set. The house exhaled uneasily as night folded itself over the street outside. Hilton House had never felt so claustrophobic. Shadows clustered in corners. Floorboards gave small, suspicious creaks. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed with the soft finality of someone locking themselves firmly away from danger. Tommy and Tuppence stood in the dimly lit hallway with Mr. Gray, who looked as if he might dissolve entirely from fear. His hands trembled so fiercely that the coat he clutched rustled like paper. You're not going alone, Tommy said for the third time. Gray's eyes darted between them. They said I must. Tuppence crossed her arms. Criminals say a great many things. They rarely mean them literally. You don't understand, Gray whispered. They want me. Only me. If they see either of you, they'll see exactly what we want them to see, Tommy interrupted calmly, which, with any luck, is two clever people with more nerve than sense. Gray blinked, unable to process the humour. They're dangerous. We've faced dangerous, Tuppence said, more than once, and we generally win. Tommy rested a reassuring hand on Gray's shoulder. We go together. End of discussion. Gray swallowed, nodding weakly. They said midnight. Excellent, Tuppence said briskly. Dramatic timing. They have taste, at least. But beneath her quick wit was steel. She had no intention of letting a terrified young man walk into the jaws of whatever waited for him. They left Hilton House with no farewell and no noise, slipping into the cold London night like a trio of shadows. The moon was thin and crooked, and the street lamps cast halos that made the quiet seem almost ceremonial. Gray led them nervously past shuttered shops and lampposts that hummed faintly with electricity. He kept glancing behind them, not trusting any corner. Tuppence walked on his right, Tommy on his left, forming a silent protective bracket. Where exactly did they say to meet you? Tommy asked. Gray gestured shakily. The warehouse near the river, the one with the iron shutters. Tommy frowned. Isn't that the one that burned partially last year? Yes. Then they chose it because it's isolated, Tuppence murmured. Good for ambushes, bad for pleasant conversation. They reached the river district, a maze of industrial buildings, empty at night except for the occasional flicker from a boat bobbing at its moorings. The water lapped faintly, whispering against the stone embankment. The warehouse loomed ahead, a squat, shadowed structure with boarded-up windows and rusting metal doors. A faint light leaked through a cracked panel, like a candle burning behind a coffin lid. "Here," Gray whispered. Tommy motioned for silence. "Stay behind us." They approached the side entrance, a warped wooden door hanging crooked on its hinges. Tommy nudged it open slowly. It groaned, the sound skittering into the vast darkness inside. Then they saw it. A lantern glowed weakly from the far end of the warehouse, its flame flickering against piles of crates. 2 men stood before it. One was unmistakably the Watcher from Hilton House, thin, angular, his coat hanging too loosely over sharp bones. The other was broader, with a brutish jaw and a jagged scar slicing across his cheek like a blade mark. At the sight of Gray, the scarred man grinned, an unpleasant smear of teeth. "Evening, lad," he said. "We were beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." Gray tried to step back, but Tommy steadied him. "You're not alone tonight," Tommy said. The Watcher sneered. "We told him to come alone." "And we told him not to listen," Tuppence replied smoothly. "Now, gentlemen, do be civil." Scarface's hand drifted toward his pocket. "Who are you two?" "Tired," Tuppence replied. "Cold, slightly annoyed, and here on behalf of Mr. Gray." The Watcher spat on the ground. "We're not here for you. We're here for what Harbury owed us." Gray stiffened. "My father owed you nothing." "Oh, he owed us plenty," Scarface growled. "He disappeared with information that was going to make us very rich. Codes, coordinates, locations. He walked away with all of it." "Because he discovered you were traitors," Gray whispered. The Watcher's eyes narrowed. "He told you that?" "He didn't have to," Gray said, voice trembling. "The Colonel confirmed it." The men exchanged a glance, the quick flicker of panic between criminals whose lies were collapsing. Scarface stepped forward. "We want the disc, the one your father kept, the one the Colonel hid." "You're not getting it," Tommy said firmly. The scarred man laughed, low and cruel. "You're brave or stupid." "Both," Tuppence said brightly. "It varies by day." The Watcher jabbed a finger at Gray. "Hand over the disc and we'll let you walk away. You can go back to your little boarding house and pretend nothing ever happened." Tommy shook his head. "We don't respond well to threats." Tuppence stepped forward. "And you might like to know that Scotland Yard already has a great interest in this little affair." Both men stiffened. "They know about the disc," she continued. "They know about the war, about Harbury, about Finch, and if we don't return in a timely manner, officers will arrive, with dogs and handcuffs and very little patience." Scarface froze. The Watcher hissed, "You're lying." Tuppence smiled. "Possibly, but are you willing to bet your freedom on it?" The scarred man's hand twitched dangerously toward his coat. Tommy's voice sharpened. "Think very carefully before pulling out anything metal." The tension swelled, thick, suffocating, ready to snap. Then a sound echoed from outside, a clatter, metal hitting the pavement, something or someone shifting near the warehouse door. The criminals jolted. "What was that?" the Watcher barked. Scarface swore. "We're being followed." Tuppence's bluff had been too convincing. Panic overtook them. The Watcher grabbed the lantern and hurled it aside, plunging the warehouse into murky shadow. "This isn't over," Scarface shouted. "We'll find what Harbury left, and we'll find you." They fled through a side exit, boots pounding, the door slamming wildly behind them. Tommy and Tuppence raced after them, but by the time they reached the alley, the men had vanished into the maze of river streets. "They know the area too well," Tommy muttered. "We'd lose them." Tuppence bent down, but they dropped something. A folded paper, water-stained at the edges. She opened it carefully. A partial cipher key, strings of symbols, half-completed coordinates, and at the bottom, scrawled in hurried handwriting, Hilton House. Gray paled. "They know where I live. They know where all of you live." "Yes," Tommy said, jaw tightening. "Which means they're getting information from someone inside." Tuppence folded the paper. "Someone slipping in and out of the boarding house." Gray looked sick. "I've brought danger to your doorstep." "No," Tuppence said firmly. "The danger was already there. You only revealed it." They walked back to Hilton House under the thin gleam of street lamps, Gray stumbling slightly from exhaustion and fear. Tommy supported him without comment. Tuppence kept scanning behind them, Any shadow, any footstep, any flicker of movement that might hint their enemies had doubled back. When they reached the doorway of the boarding house, the hallway inside was dark, unnaturally dark. No lamp, no firelight, no murmuring residents, just the hush of a house holding its breath. Tuppence stepped forward first. "Is anyone awake?" she called softly. A shape shifted near the end of the corridor. "Who's there?" Tommy asked. A small sob answered. Then the piano teacher stepped into the faint sliver of light from the open door, her face blotched with tears. "Please," she whispered. "I need to tell you something." Tuppence approached her gently. "What is it?" "I've been receiving letters," the woman said, voice trembling, "for weeks, threatening ones, telling me to watch Mr. Gray, to report anything unusual. If I didn't, they said they'd come for me next." Gray sucked in a breath. "Letters? About me?" The piano teacher nodded miserably. "I didn't want to, I swear. I didn't want to spy, but they said they knew where my sister lived." She broke down. "They said they'd hurt her." Tuppence guided her to the nearest chair. "It's all right. You did what frightened people do, but now you're safe." "When did the letters start?" Tommy asked. "A little after Mr. Gray arrived," she whispered. "Someone was watching him, and watching me." Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. "The enemy," he said quietly, "is closer than we thought." The decision to search the house did not happen all at once. It grew gradually, like a quiet seed taking root, fed by every nervous glance, every creaking floorboard, every half-spoken confession that floated through Hilton House. "Someone is hiding something here," Tuppence murmured as she stood by the upstairs landing, gazing thoughtfully at a spiderweb tremoring in a corner. "And not in the kitchen, or the Colonel's drawers. Somewhere older, somewhere forgotten." Tommy followed her gaze. "You think the house itself is keeping secrets?" "I think old houses always do," Tuppence said, "especially houses full of frightened people and half-truths." Their opportunity arrived when Mrs. Melling fussed loudly about a persistent draft she claimed came from somewhere overhead, though she had never bothered to locate it herself. "Drafts," Tommy whispered, "are the gateway to destiny." "And to attics," Tuppence added, eyes glinting. Mrs. Melling eagerly granted them permission to investigate. "You have a knack for these things," she declared, "and the Colonel refuses to go up there ever since a moth landed on his collar. Said it nearly blinded him." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "We'll be careful." Hilton House's attic door was an obstinate creature, swollen by years of humidity and disuse. Tommy wrestled with its stubborn hinges until it groaned open like the slow yawn of an ancient beast. A faint smell drifted out, dust, old fabric, the ghost of furniture polish long evaporated. Tuppence clicked on the lantern Mrs. Melling had provided. "After you," she said, though she didn't wait for him and climbed first, skirts swishing. The attic greeted them with a cold stillness. It was a cathedral of forgotten things, trunks stacked like coffins, chairs missing limbs, a dressmaker's dummy tilted as if eavesdropping, and boxes furred with decades of dust. Cobwebs shimmered in the lamplight like delicate lace. "This," Tommy murmured, "is where old secrets come to nap." "And sometimes wake," Tuppence replied. They began their sweep with methodical care. Tommy examined old crates while Tuppence rummaged through trunks filled with yellowing linens and outdated hats. Dust motes swirled around her like tiny stars. After 10 minutes, she paused over a battered chest near the far wall. It was smaller than the others, sturdier, with brass clasps that looked suspiciously polished for its age. "Tommy," she called softly, "someone touched this recently." He joined her. The chest was locked, or rather, had once been locked. The clasp hung crooked, as if forced open in haste. Tuppence lifted the lid. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. She inhaled sharply. The handwriting on the envelopes was elegant, precise, unmistakably old-fashioned. She lifted one gently. "A.H.," she read from the signature. "Alec Harbury." Tommy's eyebrows rose. Gray's father. "And these?" Tuppence picked up another letter, reading the name in looping script. Addressed to, "My dearest Clara." "Clara?" Tommy repeated. A beat of silence. Tuppence closed her eyes briefly. "Clara Sayers." "Mrs. Sayers," Tommy blinked. "Our resident gossip?" "Resident keeper of other people's secrets," Tuppence corrected. "And apparently a keeper of Alec Harbury's. She opened the top letter carefully. The ink had faded but was still legible. If anything happens to me, the truth lies where soldiers once marched in peacetime. Tuppence looked up. Here's our clue. Tommy paced slowly. A phrase like that is not written casually. Harbury must have left something behind, something connected to the war. And he trusted Clara Sayers with it, Tuppence said. Though why she hid these letters instead of burning them? She's sentimental, Tommy guessed. Or afraid. Or guilty, Tuppence murmured. She tucked the letters safely into her coat, but the attic had one more secret waiting. Tommy had wandered toward an old writing desk pushed against the eaves. Something about the way it leaned seemed unnatural. He tapped its side, hollow. "Tuppence," he said, "help me move this." Together they dragged the rickety desk away from the wall. A wooden panel behind it looked ordinary until Tuppence pressed lightly on its centre. It shifted inward with a soft click. A hiding place. Inside the hollow cavity sat a small wooden box. Tuppence lifted it with reverence. The lid slid off smoothly. A metal disc lay inside, identical to the Colonel's. "A second cipher disc," Tommy whispered. "Good Lord." "And hidden here, in the attic, where Mrs. Sayers keeps her secrets," Tuppence murmured. "Alec Harbury must have hidden this before he disappeared," Tommy said, "or Clara hid it for him." "Which begs the question," Tuppence added, "why did she never retrieve it? And who knew enough to search her things, or the Colonel's, at now?" She lifted the disc from the box. The attic door slammed shut. The sound was violent, jarring, and a bang that rattled the rafters and sent a shower of dust cascading from the beams. Tommy spun around. "Who's there?" Heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs, retreating rapidly. Tuppence dropped to her knees and examined the door. Locked from outside, jammed. Tommy rushed to the window. It was nailed shut. "Someone knew we'd come up here," he said grimly. "And someone didn't want us leaving," Tuppence replied. "At least not with what we found." Tommy scanned the edges of the attic. "There's a side hatch leading to the storage loft. Might get us into another corridor." Tuppence followed him to the low opening hidden by a heap of old curtains. Together they pushed aside enough debris to crawl through. It was a tight squeeze, dark, dusty, and lined with beams that required careful contortion. But at last Tommy forced open a small side door, and they stumbled out onto an upper landing near Mrs. Melling's linen cupboard. Tuppence dusted herself off. "Next time, remind me to bring a crowbar." They descended the stairs, searching the hall for signs of their would-be jailer. Mrs. Sayers was in the drawing-room, sipping tea with a tremor in her hand. Her teacup rattled when she saw them. "You're very dusty." "We found the source of the draught," Tuppence said pleasantly. "Old houses hide all sorts of things." Sayers swallowed. "Oh? Did you find anything interesting?" Tuppence fixed her with a sweet smile that held steel beneath. "More than you might expect." Mrs. Sayers' gaze flickered, not to Tuppence, but toward Tuppence's coat pocket where the letters rested. Tommy caught it instantly. Tuppence moved closer. "Mrs. Sayers, did you ever know an Alec Harbury?" Her teacup jerked. A droplet splashed onto her skirt. No, she stammered. "Are you sure?" Tuppence pressed. "Because he knew a Clara Sayers." Mrs. Sayers' face drained of colour. "Poor Alec," she whispered before she could stop herself. Tommy leaned forward. "So you did know him?" Mrs. Sayers set her cup down with shaking fingers. "I was young. It was wartime. People were lonely." Her voice cracked. "He was a good man." "And the letters he wrote you?" Tuppence asked gently. Mrs. Sayers flinched. "Where did you—" "Oh." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "They were hidden," Tuppence said, "far from prying eyes." Mrs. Sayers trembled. "I didn't know what to do with them. After he vanished, I thought someone might come looking, so I hid everything he trusted me with." "Everything? Including a cipher disc?" Tommy asked. Mrs. Sayers' lips quivered. She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Then Gray appeared at the stairs, pale, sweating, hands clenched. "Did you find something?" he asked, voice shaking. Tuppence opened her coat and revealed the box. Gray froze. "That's my father's," he whispered. Tommy placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We're getting closer." Gray swallowed hard, fighting fresh waves of grief and hope, but Tommy's voice hardened. And someone locked us in the attic. Someone wanted us trapped up there. Tuppence's eyes swept the hallway. Anyone could have done it. At that moment, footsteps echoed from the upper corridor. The Colonel appeared, looking winded, as if he had been pacing anxiously. "What's happened?" he demanded. Tuppence held up the disc. "We found something connected to Alec Harbury." The Colonel's breath hitched. Another disc. Good Lord. "Someone," Tommy said, "is terrified we'll assemble the puzzle." Mrs. Sayers shuddered. "You must leave it alone, all of you. These things, they bring danger." "We're already in danger," Tuppence said gently, "and hiding won't save us." Gray stepped forward, voice thin but determined. "My father left clues for a reason. He wanted the truth found." The Colonel sank into a chair. Harbury suspected a traitor. Finch disappeared. And now, someone has returned to finish what was started. "I don't want anyone hurt," Mrs. Sayers whispered. "Least of all, Alec's son." Tuppence reached for her arm. "Then help us." Mrs. Sayers shook her head helplessly. I can't." She fled the room, nearly tripping over the carpet in her haste. Gray looked lost, overwhelmed. Tommy's voice was low and grave. "Whoever trapped us in the attic will try again, and next time they won't settle for trapping." Tuppence nodded. "The boarding house isn't merely unsettled anymore." Her gaze turned sharp. "It's a battlefield. The enemy has been coming and going." The morning broke with the heavy stillness of a room after an argument, silent but thick with everything unsaid. By the time Tommy and Tuppence entered the dining room, the boarders were already in place, arranged around the breakfast table like chess pieces afraid to move lest the others pounce. Mrs. Melling fluttered about with a pot of weak tea, her hands trembling as she poured. The Colonel sat at the end of the table, posture rigid, staring furiously at his poached egg as though it were personally responsible for the war. Mrs. Sayers poked nervously at her toast, eyes darting between Tuppence and Mr. Gray. The typist clutched her handbag so tightly her knuckles blanched, as though it contained her last lifeline. Gray hovered near the doorway, too anxious to sit, too ashamed to flee. Tuppence slipped into her seat with deceptive lightness. "What a cheerful gathering," she murmured. "Like Christmas morning, if everyone hated one another." Tommy took his seat across from her. "Let's not provoke them just yet." "Oh, but I'm not provoking," Tuppence said sweetly. "I'm observing." She lifted her voice slightly, just enough to rise above the clink of cutlery. "Well, Tommy dear, I suppose we ought to discuss what we found in the house." Mrs. Sayers' spoon slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her plate. The typist froze. The Colonel made a choking sound halfway between a cough and a gulp. Tommy arched a brow. "Must you be so theatrical?" "It's not theatre," Tuppence replied. "It's breakfast." Mrs. Melling blinked. What exactly did you find?" Tuppence smiled with immaculate innocence. "Just a war-era cache. Letters, maps, a cipher or two." The effect was immediate. The Colonel's fork slipped from his hand. The typist shot upright as though electrocuted. Mrs. Sayers clutched the tablecloth to steady herself. Gray, poor soul, simply paled further. Tommy cleared his throat. "Perhaps we might discuss this calmly." "Calmly?" Mrs. Sayers squeaked. "Calmly? There are criminals, codes, and heaven knows what else in this house. Calm doesn't enter into it." Before Tuppence could respond, a piercing scream shattered the tense scene. The maid burst into the doorway, eyes wild. "She's hurt! Miss Harringdale! The piano teacher! She's fallen!" "What do you mean, fallen?" Tommy demanded, already rising. "She's at the bottom of the stairs. She's hurt bad. I think she was pushed." The breakfast room erupted. Chairs scraped. Mrs. Melling shrieked. Gray staggered against the doorframe. The Colonel swore loudly enough to scandalize an entire parish. Tuppence sprinted with Tommy toward the staircase. The piano teacher lay crumpled at the foot of the steps, her hair dishevelled, her glasses cracked, and blood trickling from her temple. Her breathing was shallow, her eyelids fluttering. "She's alive," Tommy said, kneeling beside her. "We need to keep her still." Tuppence stroked the woman's hand. "Miss Harringdale, can you hear me?" Barely, the woman's lips moved. "One word," she whispered. "Tell me," Tuppence urged. The woman's eyes fluttered open for a fleeting second. "Upstairs," she murmured. Then she slipped into unconsciousness. Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. No words were needed. They bolted up the stairs. The attic door hung open, not slammed this time, but ajar, swaying slightly as though someone had left in a hurry. Tommy reached it first and strode inside. The attic was a mess again. Dust disturbed, boxes shifted, footprints scattered like frantic question marks, and the wooden hiding cavity, which Tuppence had opened the night before, sat empty. Tommy scanned the floor. It's gone. Tuppence already knew what he meant. The second metal disc, Alec Harbury's hidden cipher, had vanished. But something remained. The ribbon. The thin, faded blue ribbon that had bound the letters. Alec Harbury's letters to Clara Sayers. Someone had taken the disc but discarded the ribbon in haste, as though the letters themselves were unimportant, as though only the cipher mattered now. Tuppence knelt and picked up the ribbon carefully. Whoever did this was here moments ago. Tommy nodded grimly, and they weren't afraid to silence Miss Harringdale. Tuppence stood, her eyes scanning the attic. Someone with access to this house is working with those men, feeding them information, guiding them. Tommy crossed his arms, and now they have one of the discs, which means we're running out of time. By the time they returned downstairs, the breakfast room had become a tribunal. Mrs. Melling sobbed behind a napkin. Mrs. Sayers wrung her hands violently. The typist clutched her handbag like a shield. The colonel paced furiously. Grey hovered, hollow-eyed and trembling. "You two," the colonel barked. "What happened?" "The second disc is gone," Tommy said. Gasps rippled through the room. "I knew it," Mrs. Sayers cried. "This house is cursed, cursed!" Tuppence stepped forward. Miss Harringdale didn't fall. She was pushed because she knew too much. Grey trembled. Will she? "She'll live," Tommy reassured him. "But she's unconscious." "We have to call the police," Mrs. Melling whimpered. "And tell them what?" Tuppence asked. "That your attic is doubling as a wartime labyrinth." Mrs. Sayers suddenly burst into tears. "I can't bear it any more." The colonel stopped pacing. "What do you know, Mrs. Sayers?" She looked at him, broken. "Alec told me. He told me there was betrayal, not from enemy agents, from someone inside, someone he trusted." Grey inhaled sharply. The colonel's face twisted. "He told you that?" "He said there was someone in your circle, someone passing information. He feared it wasn't Finch. He feared it was—" She broke off. Everyone stared. Tommy stepped closer. "Feared it was who, Mrs. Sayers?" The woman crumpled into her chair, sobbing. "He feared it was the colonel." Silence dropped like a stone. The colonel staggered back as though struck. "That is a lie," he rasped. "Alec was my friend. He accused me once. Yes, but only in a moment of fear." Mrs. Sayers trembled. "He said you knew things you shouldn't, that messages changed meaning after you handled them." The colonel slammed his fist onto the table. "We were at war. Everyone handled messages." Tommy stepped forward. "Colonel, is this true? Did Alec accuse you?" The colonel's fists clenched. His voice dropped to a painful whisper. "Yes, he confronted me, but it was never proven. We argued, and then he disappeared." "Because he feared betrayal," Grey whispered, "from his own friend." The colonel rounded on him. "You listen to me, boy. I did not betray your father." Grey flinched. Tuppence stepped between them. "Both of you stop, right now." Tommy lifted his hands. "We are missing the important point. Someone here pushed Miss Harringdale. Someone took the disc. Whether they're an old traitor or a new opportunist, they're among us." Mrs. Sayers shook violently. "I didn't do it, I swear." "No one said you did," Tuppence said gently. The typist spoke suddenly. "Someone was in my room last night." All heads snapped toward her. "What?" Tuppence asked. The typist clutched her handbag tighter. "I heard someone opening the door, rummaging. When I sat up, they fled." "What were they looking for?" Tommy asked. I don't know." Tuppence eyed the bulging handbag. "What's in there?" The typist hesitated. "It's my business." "Not any more," the colonel snapped. Tuppence raised a hand. "Let her speak." After a long moment, the typist opened the bag with trembling fingers. Inside were pages, dozens of them, torn from a ledger. Tommy exhaled. "The same ledger as the scrap we found in the garden." The typist nodded miserably. "I found them under my mattress 2 days ago. I don't know who put them there. I was afraid to tell anyone." Tuppence turned the pages. Many names were crossed out violently. Addresses, Dates. One page bore the same Birmingham address circled on the Colonel's map. Tommy's voice was low. Someone wanted these hidden until now. The typist wrung her hands. Am I in danger? We all are, Tuppence said, until we uncover the truth. Mrs. Sayers' sobbing subsided into broken murmurs. I didn't want to believe Alec, but what if he was right? What if someone in his circle betrayed him and is still trying to bury the truth? The Colonel shook his head vehemently. I was not that man. I swear it. Then who was? Tommy asked. No one answered, because the person who knew was either long dead or standing in the room right now. Tuppence lifted the cipher ribbon. The disc was taken because someone believes they can decode Harbury's final message. If they do that before us, we lose. Gray straightened, new determination burning weakly in his eyes. Then we need to decipher it ourselves. Tommy nodded. We have one disc, the criminals have the other, and Harbury's message lies somewhere between them. And his clue, Tuppence added, where soldiers once marched in peacetime. The Colonel blinked. That could refer to dozens of places. Not dozens, Tuppence murmured, mind already racing, only those connected to Harbury's unit. Mrs. Sayers closed her eyes. He mentioned something once, a place he loved, somewhere peaceful, somewhere symbolic. She looked helpless. But I can't remember. Gray knelt by her chair. Please try. Her face twisted with the effort. I just can't. Tommy exhaled slowly. Then we must find another clue, quickly. The room held its breath. Someone in this house had pushed Miss Harringdale. Someone had taken the disc. Someone was working with dangerous men, and that someone was watching their every word. Tuppence's voice cut the silence. Breakfast is over, she said softly, and so is pretending. The next move is ours. Night in Hilton House stretched thin and sleepless. The lamps in the sitting room flickered softly, illuminating Tommy, Tuppence, and Gray as they hunched over the small table where the Colonel's cipher disc lay beside the torn ledger scrap. The typist's pages, the Birmingham map, and Clara Sayers' letters formed a disorderly constellation of clues around them, a battlefield of ink and memory. Tuppence moved the disc gently, aligning the etched symbols with the partial cipher key recovered from the warehouse. Her fingers were steady, her brows drawn in intense concentration. Tommy stood behind her, studying the rotations with a practiced codebreaker's rhythm. Gray hovered near them, wringing his hands, pacing small circles as if afraid the room might collapse if he stood still. This segment matches the coordinates, Tommy murmured, adjusting the metal wheel until two symbols clicked into alignment. Here, look. Tuppence leaned closer. Yes, and this line, it resolves when you use the disc with the key. Gray held his breath. Does that mean? It means your father left us a trail, Tuppence said gently. A very clever one. They worked for hours. Midnight dissolved into one, then two. The house was silent except for the distant groans of old floorboards settling into their age and the soft, reassuring tick of the old mantel clock. Symbols shifted, letters appeared, uniformly carved codes resolved into English words. At last, Tuppence exhaled a startled breath. It's forming a message. Gray leaned over her shoulder. Tommy read aloud, slowly, carefully, the words emerging from the cipher. Where soldiers once marched in peacetime, beneath the stone of quiet remembrance. A hush fell over the room. Gray whispered, I've heard that phrase before. Soldiers marching in peacetime. The old parade ground, Tommy said, straightening. Before the war, regiments drilled there. After the war, they turned it into a memorial park. Peace in place of preparation. Tuppence nodded. And remembrance beneath the stone. That must mean one of the memorial markers in the park. Gray's breath shook. He hid something there. My father. He hid something knowing that one day someone would need to find it, Tuppence finished softly. The moment was quiet, almost sacred. Tommy folded the cipher papers carefully. We go at dawn, before anyone else gets wind of it. Gray swallowed. Will the others suspect? Let them suspect, Tuppence said firmly, but they won't know where we've gone. Tommy put a steadying hand on Gray's shoulder. Whatever your father left, it's meant for you, but we'll stand beside you when you read it. Gray nodded, and for the first time his eyes held more than fear. They held resolve. The morning was still and pale, the the sky a muted wash of colour as the trio made their way to the city's outskirts. London's early streets were quiet, the hum of daily bustle yet to begin. A milk cart rattled by, a newspaper boy yawned into the cold air. Everything felt suspended, as if the city knew they were following the final thread of a long-buried story. The Memorial Park appeared ahead, a serene stretch of grass punctuated by stone markers engraved with the names of lost regiments. Trees lined the paths, their leaves rustling softly in a gentle breeze. Gray paused at the entrance. "He brought me here once," he said. "I was too young to understand. He said this place meant something." Tuppence gave him an encouraging nod. "Then it's fitting we've returned." They walked the length of the path until they reached a circular stone, larger than the others, a parade ground marker. Beneath it, flowers had been placed over the years, now wilted or blown aside by time. Tommy knelt and inspected the base. "Help me move this." Tuppence and Gray joined him. Together they lifted the heavy stone, grunting under the weight. Beneath it, nestled among the soil and roots, was a rusted tin box. Gray's breath caught. "This is it. This must be it." Tuppence brushed dirt from the lid. He hid it well. Tommy prized open the box carefully. Inside lay papers, fragile but intact, neatly folded and sealed with an old ribbon similar to the one recovered in the attic. A letter lay on top, addressed simply, "To my son." Gray took it with trembling fingers. "Read it," Tommy said softly. Gray unfolded the paper. His voice broke as he read. "If you find this, it means danger has resurfaced. I was betrayed, not by enemies, but by those within my own circle. 2 agents sought to sell British intelligence for profit. I uncovered their pact, and they vanished into the shadows with their secrets. If they come for you, know I tried to stop them. I tried to protect you both. Forgive me for the silence. Forgive me for leaving. Truth is safer buried until it must be unearthed." Gray pressed the letter to his chest. "He wasn't a traitor," he whispered. "He was the victim." Tuppence touched his arm. "And now you know." But before they could examine the remaining contents of the tin, a voice cut through the quiet. "Well, well, a touching reunion." They spun around. The 2 men from the warehouse stood beside the nearest tree, guns drawn. Scarface wore a triumphant sneer. The watcher looked cold and purposeful. "Hand over the box," Scarface ordered. "Now." Tommy stepped forward. "You realize the police know—" "Oh, save it," the watcher snapped. "Your little bluff won't save you now." Gray backed away instinctively. Tuppence shifted subtly, placing herself between him and the gunman. Scarface gestured sharply. "The box, or the lad dies." Tommy lifted the box slowly. "You want this? Fine, but you won't like what's inside." He tossed it toward them. The watcher caught it greedily and flipped the lid open. The men's expressions changed instantly. Confusion, then recognition, then dawning horror. Inside the box, beneath Harbury's confession, were coded records, lists of dates, locations, and payments, evidence of their own collaboration with a foreign buyer. Harbury had recorded everything, anticipating that one day his betrayers might return. Tuppence said quietly, "Your names are in there, along with your crimes." Scarface lunged forward. "You lying!" A shout cracked through the air. "Stand down!" The colonel burst from behind the stone monument, breathless, disheveled, and furious. He must have followed them from the boarding house. The gunman whirled toward him. Tommy seized the moment, lunging at Scarface, grabbing his wrist. They grappled, the gun skittering into the grass. Tuppence snatched a memorial wreath from beside the stone and hurled it at the watcher, catching him off balance. She tackled him with unexpected ferocity. Gray backed away, terrified but unharmed. The colonel charged in, swinging his walking cane with military precision, striking Scarface across the shoulder. The man howled. Tommy twisted his arm and disarmed him completely. The watcher attempted to flee, but Tuppence's grip was iron. She held him down despite his struggling, her expression set and fierce. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Scarface snarled as Tommy pinned him. "We'd have got away with it, if not for you." Tommy smirked. "Do send us a postcard from prison." Within moments, policemen sprinted across the grass, guns raised. The criminals were dragged to their feet, handcuffed, and hauled toward the waiting motorcar. As the last officer shut the car door, the watcher's gaze locked onto Gray. Your father ruined us, and now you've ruined us again. Gray flinched, but Tuppence stepped protectively in front of him. He left you exactly what you deserved, she said sharply, and so have we. The car sped off, leaving silence in its wake. Tommy, Tuppence, Gray, and the Colonel stood together by the memorial stone. The morning sunlight warmed the grass. The breeze carried the faint scent of rosemary left by visitors. Gray unfolded the letter again, reading silently. Tuppence watched him, her expression softening. He wrote this for you. Gray nodded. He wasn't trying to escape us. He was trying to protect us. Tommy placed a hand on his shoulder. Your father was a good man, Gray, and now his story is complete. The Colonel looked away, jaw tight. I wronged him in my heart. I believed his accusation and let it poison years that could have been redeemed. Gray looked up. You were his friend, and in the end, you helped save me. The Colonel blinked rapidly, unable to speak. Tuppence sighed gently. Well, that's one mystery settled. Tommy added, but remember, we still have to deal with the traitor inside Hilton House. Gray froze. You mean someone else? Yes, Tuppence said softly. Someone still free. Someone who tried to kill Miss Harringdale. Someone who stole the second disc. Tommy nodded grimly. The case isn't finished. Not yet. Gray held his father's letter close. Then we must go back. Tuppence tucked the tin box safely under her arm. Back to Hilton House. Tommy stepped onto the path leading toward the gate, glancing once more at the memorial stones. Back, he said, to uncover the last traitor. And together they walked toward the rising sun, toward the final revelations waiting inside the House of Secrets. Hilton House looked strangely peaceful when Tommy, Tuppence, Gray, and the Colonel returned that afternoon. A hush hung over the building, not the tense, breathless silence of recent days, but a softer one, like a house settling after a long storm. The familiar quirks of the place returned gradually. The squeak of the banister as they climbed, the faint clink of washing up from the kitchen, Mrs. Melling's habit of humming tunelessly when anxious. Yet something deeper had shifted. A weight that none of them had ever spoken of aloud had finally lifted. As they entered the drawing room, the boarders looked up with expressions ranging from tentative curiosity to outright relief. Mrs. Sayers sat in her usual chair, wringing her handkerchief. The typist perched by the window, her handbag still held protectively, though less tightly than before. Miss Harringdale, pale but conscious and upright, rested on the sofa with a blanket tucked neatly around her knees. Mrs. Melling bustled in. Thank heavens you're all right. I've been beside myself. Honestly, criminals and codes and policemen, it's like living in a novel. Tommy coughed discreetly. Yes, well, we're quite safe now. Mrs. Melling dabbed her face with a napkin. I should hope so. And next time something dreadful happens, please give warning before the breakfast porridge goes cold. Some of us have nerves. Tuppence smiled faintly. We'll keep that in mind. Gray lingered near the doorway, uncertain. Everyone's eyes drifted toward him, not hostilely, but gently, as if recognizing the boy who had entered this house trembling and drained of hope had changed in ways they'd all witnessed. The Colonel cleared his throat, loudly, awkwardly, like a man facing a firing squad without armor. Gray, he began stiffly, I owe you an apology. A tremendous apology. Gray blinked. Colonel? No, the Colonel insisted. I said unforgivable things. I doubted your father's integrity. I doubted your own, and I let an accusation from years ago poison every interaction since. His voice softened. Your father was wrong about me, but I wronged him by letting that wound fester. Gray's eyes glistened. He trusted you once. And I failed that trust, the Colonel whispered. He stood straighter, bracing himself. I should have defended him. I should have looked deeper. And I hope, sincerely, that you can forgive a foolish old soldier who held on to anger for far too long. Gray stepped forward slowly. Then he extended his hand. I forgive you. The Colonel's breath shuddered. He took the offered hand in both of his, gripping it with a strength that betrayed relief rather than pride. Mrs. Sayers let out a tiny sob at the sight. Speaking of which, she said shakily, I must ask your forgiveness as well. She looked at Gray with a timid, earnest expression. I should have told you I knew your father. I should have burned those letters years ago. I didn't want to let go of him, but keeping them only created more danger. Gray gave her a gentle, understanding smile. You loved him. That's nothing to be ashamed of. Mrs. Sayers' eyes shone. Even so, I think it's best I leave Hilton House. I've caused too much trouble. Nonsense, Mrs. Melling interrupted with uncharacteristic firmness. You'll do no such thing. We all have our secrets. Some of us have entire cupboards full of them. And besides, who will cut the scones properly if you go? Mrs. Sayers dabbed at her cheeks, managing a watery smile. The typist stood next, twisting her handbag strap. I also hid things, she swallowed. But I truly meant no harm. I only hid the ledger pages because I was terrified, and people kept entering my room without my knowing. Tommy softened. Fear makes even sensible people do odd things. Tuppence added with kindly amusement. Some of us hoard ledgers, others hoard teacups. Mrs. Melling gasped. I do not hoard teacups. Of course not, Tuppence said gravely. You merely collect them in every cupboard. A few tentative laughs fluttered around the room. Even Miss Harringdale managed a tired chuckle. And just like that, Hilton House began to heal. Later, when the afternoon had deepened into warm, mellow light, Gray stood outside the building with a small suitcase at his feet. Tommy and Tuppence accompanied him to the steps. The street felt calm, as though London itself had decided the boy had earned a respite. Gray exhaled, long and slow. I never expected any of this. I only came here because I saw the Colonel's name. I thought maybe he'd give me a single answer. And instead, Tuppence said with a soft smile, you found a labyrinth. Gray chuckled faintly, a rather terrifying one. But you came out the other side, Tommy said, stronger than when you arrived. Gray looked down at the letter in his hand, his father's final message. The sun caught the worn paper edges, turning them gold. I know who he was now. I know why he left. I know what he fought to protect. He looked up, gratitude bright in his eyes. And I know he wasn't alone, because of you. Tuppence touched his arm lightly. You were brave. Your father would be proud. Gray's voice wavered. I hope so. Tommy shook his hand firmly. Where will you go now? Home, Gray said with quiet conviction, to tell my mother the truth, to give her peace. And after that? Tuppence asked. Gray smiled. After that, wherever life takes me. They exchanged warm farewells. Gray tipped his hat, a gesture oddly adult for someone who had been so frightened days earlier, then walked down the street, his suitcase swinging gently at his side. He did not look back. Tuppence watched him until he turned the corner. He'll be all right, Tommy. Tommy nodded. Yes, the stranger in the boarding house is no longer a stranger. They shared a peaceful silence on the steps. Tuppence tilted her head. Funny thing about homes. Tommy raised a brow. Only funny? All right, maddening, creaky, emotional things, she corrected. But homes aren't about roofs or wallpaper. They're about what people hide inside them. Secrets tucked behind dressers, letters forgotten in attics, and truths that refuse to stay buried. Tommy gave her a wry grin. Remind me to buy you a philosopher's hat. Don't bother, I'd only lose it, he laughed. And remind me, in future, to avoid boarding houses whenever possible. They're too full of drama. Oh, Tommy, Tuppence sighed. That's exactly why we always end up in them. True, he conceded, and if we didn't, life would get terribly dull. Before Tuppence could reply, Mrs. Melling popped her head out of the doorway. Oh, Tommy, Tuppence, before you run off. She wrung her hands. Another little problem has arisen. Tuppence winced. Define little. My umbrella has disappeared, Mrs. Melling said gravely. Again, someone has borrowed it without asking. Tuppence's face fell. Not again. Tommy patted her arm consolingly. It could be worse. How? He grinned. It could be coded. Tuppence groaned. Let's go. They stepped down the last stair, linking arms as they walked along the pavement. Behind them, Mrs. Melling called after them with some new complaint about a missing teapot or a suspicious creak in the laundry room. Tuppence didn't bother turning around. Another mystery awaited, somewhere around the next corner. Small or large, ordinary or extraordinary. But for now the sun was warm, the street was quiet, and Tommy's arm around hers felt like the truest sort of home. The stranger's mystery had been solved, but the spirit of adventure, like a loyal companion, walked beside them still.